Welcome to the Character Sheet, comicbook.com's YouTube channel about all things fantasy and tabletop. I am Christian Hoffer, and I am joined by producer Pete. And today we are talking about the new OGL and what it means for some of your favorite tabletop publishers like Critical Role, Paizo, Kobold Press, and more.
Right. And now we were not going to go into a ton of detail about the original OGL because there are dozens of videos out there. They've been broken down by lawyers. They're obviously great sources. We'll put even a few links in the description. But basically, the OGL just let you publish D&D, even adjacent content, without fear of the legal repercussions of Wizards of the Coast coming after you. It's used by a lot of your favorite creators out there. Kobold Press, Pathfinder uses it. Almost every major D&D Kickstarter you've seen or RPG Kickstarter you've seen in the last 5 years uses it. But we're now talking about this leaked 1.1 OGL, and specifically why it's gotten even the Critical Roles of the world, even the huge third-party publishers of the world, pretty upset, and why that may mean that Critical Role could be leaving D&D, and they may not be the only publisher to do so. We'll take a quick look at this tweet here that Matthew Merther liked. It's from Cam Banks, and I think he breaks it down perfectly. And it says his hot take is D&D is the #1 TTRPG in the world because of the open game license and the community of designers and players this has fostered. Not because it's the better game, not even because it's called D&D. And I think he's right, but now let's dive into what this 1.1 leaked OGL means for Critical Role.
So the 1.1 OGL contains several disturbing or problematic things for third-party publishers. It sets up a royalty system, which big publishers like Critical Role, Paizo, and others probably would not like, because as it is established, they would have to pay a 25% royalty on any revenue they make over $750,000. Another big thing is that Wizards of the Coast claims that if you publish under the new OGL, they would technically have ownership to the work created. Now, this would your copyrights would still be protected. So, like if you create a character for an adventure and you copyright it, you would still have that copyright, but they would be able to use your work even without your permission, because by publishing the OGL, by publishing under the OGL, that is giving them permission by default.
Yeah, if you're the next like R.A. Salvatore and you make the next Driz Duerden, and you make a bunch of adventures for them, there would be nothing stopping them to turn around and make their own new Driz Duerden adventures, because that's what this leaked 1.1 OGL seems to entail, and that's a big issue. Even though almost certainly Critical Role will be negotiating some kind of side deal.
Yes.
But it just kind of shows you the reach that Wizards of the Coast is going for. And as Critical Role tries to become more and more fully creator owned in terms of full ownership of all of their content, that's got to be weighing on their minds quite a bit. And I think we'll have an answer to how serious they are about potentially leaving the system in the very near future.
Yes. So to a couple of really quick clarification. Currently, Critical Role, what the OGL doesn't impact Critical Role the show directly. Okay, that is all video content that uses Dungeons and Dragons is impacted. It's covered under a separate policy called the fan content policy. Basically, as long as you put up your videos for free, you can make them. But it does impact the published works. The big one is the Tal'Dorei campaign setting, which originally was published under Green Ronin under the open game license, and then was republished by Darrington Press, which is owned by Critical Role. Critical Role almost certainly has a separate deal because they have published 2 books with Wizards of the Coast, and Wizards of the Coast does not own that content, but the thing is that if this new OGL stands, if they were, if Critical Role wanted to publish another Darrington Press rulebook under the open game license, it would run afoul, that we would suddenly have some ownership issues between Wizards of the Coast and Critical Role. And it's a kind of funny timing that all this comes out, because currently there is a storyline in the current Critical Role campaign in which the deities of Exandria, the world that Critical Role takes place in, are under threat. And all of these deities are established Dungeons and Dragons deities. These are deities that were created by Wizards of the Coast or TSR, and I believe they are owned by them. Anyways, and you can see that in the Green Ronin and in Darrington Press versions of Tal'Dorei. These gods are not referred to by their proper names. They are all referred to by their titles. Bahamut is the Platinum Dragon. You have the Wild Mother. You have the Matron of Ravens instead of, the Raven Queen and things like that. And the reason why is that is Critical Role's way of getting around that copyright issue, which is all currently, they can publish books about that under the open game license right now. Mercer and the rest of the cast almost certainly knew this was coming in some form. As I get distracted by Sam Riegel, pelvic thrusting. But he certainly knew this was coming, and the timing of this leak and the fact that Mercer might be killing off the D&D gods raises some interesting questions.
Right. The D&D gods are basically the last non-Mercer created content in Exandria. And if this campaign goes the way that we think it might go, and those gods get wiped out, all of a sudden Exandria is in the free and clear. And if, say, after campaign 3, because they obviously won't switch systems in the middle of a campaign, that would be absolute chaos. But after campaign 3, they're free to, if they want, take their entire product and either self-publish their own rule system, just completely leave D&D for that, or to maybe go back to Pathfinder because they started with Pathfinder, although that's probably a bit more unlikely. But it lets them have complete ownership of their setting in a way where they don't even have to partner with D&D, because even when they partnered with D&D for stuff like the Call of the Netherdeep or the Wildmount book, that was profit that could have gone to them that was going to D&D in a split revenue stream instead. And they've been very clear that they would like, this is all about creator ownership, and they would like to be able to, publish their own, supplements, their own adventures without having to share that with someone, because honestly, they're doing all the work.
Yeah, and that is the thing. This, so the open game license for 20 years has been a mutually beneficial relationship between Wizards of the Coast and third-party publishers. And, Matt Mercer is a third-party publisher. He published multiple subclasses on the DM's Guild, which is covered by a separate arrangement, we will note. And that is the reason why you've never seen, what's the Blood Hunter, right?
Yeah, Blood Hunter.
That's why you've never seen subclasses for that, put into Tal'Dorei campaign setting Reborn or any other book, because that is covered by a separate license. And that, the document that was published by Matt Mercer is technically owned by Wizards of the Coast. As they move to, basically solidify their separate fantasy realm. And, this wouldn't be the first time that Dungeons and Dragons has published someone else's fantasy setting and has lost the rights to it. So if campaign 4 comes along, and they move to another game system, it wouldn't be the first time. The Legends of the Five Rings was at one point in time a Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting.
Yeah, after like all the AEG properties, Burning Sands. They're basically, this is, like I said, this would not be the first time this has happened, but this would be by far the biggest blow to D&D, and they'd only have themselves to blame for what everyone kind of views as a massive ownership overreach.
If it would have been a 5% royalty,
that's what that could be like the top.
When people were when it first came out, when and Dungeons and Dragons straight up said, yeah, we're going to charge a royalty, and they were like, oh, it's only going to affect like 20 creators max, and everyone kind of assumed, okay, like a 5% skim off the top, that's a little bit of an extortion, but that's the price to pay.
Price of doing business.
That is something that is baked in, you can bake into your costs. But a 25% royalty fee, even if if it were $1 million, it would only be 25% of 250,000. even that is the difference between a profitable book and an unprofitable book. That's the difference between bringing on an extra freelancer or two, paying for a few high quality art pieces that could really put your book over the top and make sure that it sells well. And it really impacts a lot more than 20 people. And that's the ownership thing. We've known that Critical Role is very protective of their IP for good reason, because they are literally turning it into TV shows. They are turning it into video games. We don't talk about that, but Critical Role is working on video games right now. We will eventually get Critical Role video games. And there are, even though Critical Role and Wizards of the Coast have what we believe is a pretty chummy relationship. It was only 2 years ago that Call of the Netherdeep last year? No, it was 2021, right?
Wildmount was the first one, and Netherdeep was either late 2021 or very early 2022.
They have a good relationship, but when season 2 of Legends of Vox Machina comes out, you will note that Critical Role did not reach a licensing agreement with Wizards of the Coast to use certain Dungeons and Dragons monsters. There are reasons why the characters have slightly different powers than they do in the their RPG counterparts. There's a reason why Beholder doesn't show up in season 2. There's a reason why we didn't get Displacer Beasts in season 1. There's a reason why they will never call Vecna Vecna. And it's precisely because Critical Role and Wizards of the Coast do not have a licensing agreement to use that in in animated cartoons.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you wonder why would they leave over just this one thing? Well, it's already impacting, as Christian just pointed out, one of their other very successful animated projects. They're having to alter their own storylines because of licensing rights, because of stuff they don't own.
Mm-hmm.
They're also,
you also see that with the exclusion of a certain character in a certain country that will not be appearing in Legend of Vox Machina.
Yes, sir, not appearing in this film. And the other thing is, I don't think people understand how wildly successful Tal'Dorei Reborn was, because it was a massive, it sold out multiple print runs, and it was all from Darrington Press, which was self-published by the Critical Role, the company itself.
Mm-hmm.
And compared to that, brought in a huge amount of income, because you're only paying your costs, and then all the profit was to you. You only paid expenses for printing. There was no one that didn't have to pay out all this other licensing stuff that you would have to do under this new OGL. Under the new OGL, Tal'Dorei Reborn, let's say it made them $5 million. Well, under the new 1.1, if you take 25% of that away, we're talking more than $1 million. But that's 25% taken before cost.
Yeah, which
means fine. It's more like 2 or 2.5 million gone, because they're taking it off the top before you recoup printing costs and all graphic designers, everything else that's involved with it.
Yeah, so if for Tal'Dorei Reborn did $5 million in revenue sales, so in gross sales, Wizards of the Coast would have taken would have come out to about a little bit over $1 million of that. And that's $1 million that Critical Role would not have to pay for the people to make that. Now in this case, Critical Role, that's the artists. That's your freelance writers, that's your main editors, it was Joey Hake and Hannah Rose. And also, that book probably would not have been profitable for Critical Role to make. Right. And, that's the big thing is people are just smaller publishers are not going to be impacted by the royalties, but the larger publishers, Hasbro is coming for their bottom, for their, these other companies' bottom lines, very directly. And, it's just egregious. I couldn't believe it. That's, I was kind of because, like I said, I understand why some of the language is in there, some of the language that makes people upset. I understand why some of that language is in there. It's a legal thing. They're not doing it to be greedy, but, that goodwill goes away when they're oh, by the way, we're charging you 25%. There's nothing.
Yeah. I think, to bring this all to a conclusion, I think that if you see in the next few weeks with the Hell's Bells and with Bell's Hells and Campaign 3, you see that they, for whatever reason, the gods of Exandria get eaten by Predathos and they're just gone, that will give you a pretty good indicator that there's a decent chance for Campaign 4 to not be based in D&D. There's I would say a great chance that it could be something self-published by Darrington Press, or at the very least, a return to Paizo and Pathfinder 2e. But you can't blame them, and we barely even scratched on how this destroys Kickstarters. There have been so many $1 million Kickstarters, and Kickstarters are fundamentally a thing where you make X amount of money up front, and then you have to pay the costs afterwards. This would destroy Kickstarters who have a very hard time of estimating those costs as it is. And then to immediately lose 25% of your $1 million Kickstarter would probably bankrupt or cause to fail a majority of those Kickstarters.
Yep.
Because that's the profit margin you're talking about on a lot of these Kickstarters.
It's really ugly. Now the one good news is that, the leaked draft that IO9 reviewed was dated early December.
Yes.
And it was supposed to be released on January 4th. Obviously, it was not released on January 4th. While the IO9 draft was fundamentally a completed draft, it was not incomplete. The fact that it has not come out means that, there was probably some level of internal pushback. And we'll state this. I will just say this too. Most of the rank and file from Wizards of the Coast, per many people within the industry, almost all of the rank and file of Wizards of the Coast are against this too.
Yeah,
they know this is not good for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, someone leaked this, and they leaked it for a reason. And that reason was probably the exact response it's getting. To show Wizards of the Coast that you can't just do this and expect for the creators and the community to sit there and just take this massive, effective price gouge to basically steal 25% from creators, and they just won't sit there and accept it when there's other options out there.
Yep.
But yeah, and we'll see. And if the gods in Exandria get eaten, Critical Role might be the next giant producer to step away from D&D.
Yeah, no, it's going to be an interesting year. We'll see when this officially comes out. That'll be the next step. And we'll also see how much Wizards of the Coast backpedals here in the next week or so as well. I'm very interested to see what their actual response will be, because they haven't said anything since this leak came out. They've given no comments or have not commented. So we'll have to see. It'll be an interesting few weeks in the tabletop industry.
Right. Well, so what do you guys think? Do you think that we will see a Campaign 4 of Critical Role not in the D&D system? And, can you imagine a Kickstarter world in which a lot of your favorite RPG projects simply don't exist anymore? Let us know what you think in the comments. And as always, feel free to toss us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.